All right, there we go. We are live. Welcome all to the Maha Report. Today we're diving into glyphosate, one of the most controversial chemicals in our food supply. Our guest is Kelly Ryerson. She's a leading advocate exposing the link between glyphosate and chronic disease. Through her platform, Glyphosate Facts, she's challenging the status quo and empowering people to protect their health. She's the Glyphosate Girl on Instagram. Give her a follow. This conversation might change the way you see your food. So let's get into it. Welcome, Kelly. Thanks for joining us today. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm good. Busy fighting glyphosate yet another day.
All right. Yeah, I know the feeling. So, what got you into this fight? What woke you up to the dangers of glyphosate and brought you around to this?
So I, like many people, was eating all kinds of junk and grew up. Once I got out onto my own after college, I was free to eat what I wanted, and I took full advantage of it and was eating all kinds of processed food, junk, and was fine for a long time until suddenly I really was not. And in my 30s, I had just had my second child and had just tons of different physical symptoms that hit me. So I was dealing with chronic fatigue. I was dealing with rashes, eyesight issues, lack of feeling in my toes and my fingers, just this gamut of physical conditions that suddenly hit me. And I went from doctor to doctor, literally 20 doctors, to try and figure out what was wrong with me. And all of them said that my blood work looked fine. And so they didn't know, and probably it was psychological. And so that's very frustrating because usually women are told if there's not something obvious that it's a psychological condition. So I was layered on 2 different antidepressants, a benzodiazepine, steroids, gabapentin. Just I was a walking pharmacy, and I had horrible side effects to everything. And finally, I was like, well, I guess I am crazy because the doctors can't find anything on me. And so I went to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist happened to have intake blood work that for the very first time tested my vitamins after all these physicians, Stanford, UCSF physicians, hadn't even bothered to checked my blood work. My vitamin levels were abysmal. I had scurvy. I had these third world conditions because I was so lacking in nutrients. And I was like, my God, like this seems so obvious. And funnily enough, when I came back, I said to my primary care doctor, oh, I think that maybe this is the issue. Maybe I'm just so malnourished. She said, oh no, those vitamin numbers don't really mean that much. And I was like, okay, I don't know much about medicine yet, but I do know that I think we need basic key vitamins in our body to function. And so I took this information, I took it to a new doctor. The doctor said, you need to try and give up gluten because a lot of, particularly women, for whatever reason, are having these autoimmune reactions to gluten and or alongside gluten exposure. And so I did that. I started feeling much better. I started eating more organically. I started feeling even better. Started tapering off all of these drugs, which, by the way, I want to do a shout out to those who are trying to taper off of any antidepressants or benzodiazepines, because it is a horror show for a lot of people. Not everyone, but for a lot of people. And so it took 5 years for me to taper off of the Valium that I had only been on for 3 weeks. When I tried to stop it, I was having seizures because my body was already dependent on it. It is a nightmare. So many people are tied up in these drugs and they can't get off. Anyway, so I decided to make the rest of my body healthy with vitamins, with food. And then I went to a conference at Columbia University at their very esteemed celiac center because I wanted to know what it was about gluten that might be causing this non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And so I went there, and one scientist got up and said, I don't know that it's the gluten that's causing non-celiac gluten sensitivity, but I don't know what it is. We need to look and see what it might be. And so I went up to the microphone and I said, well, are they spraying anything on the grains before they're harvested? I wonder if it's something to do with the farm. And they said, no, I don't think so. And so I was like, okay, I didn't know anything. And then later on, someone from General Mills found me at the conference and said, yeah, Roundup is sprayed on grains that are non-organic all across our country right before harvest. And I was like, Roundup, like the weed killer that you buy in Home Depot, is sprayed on our food right before harvest, is what you're saying. And he said, that's right. And I was like, okay, if that's the case, it needs to stop now, because not knowing much, it can't be good. And I said, how long will it take to stop that practice? And he said, at least 2 decades to change farmer practices. And I was like, well, aren't you in charge of buying this massive amount of grains for General Mills? And he's like, yeah, but it just takes a lot for farmers to change. So now we get to the story where I was so appalled by that, I started looking up people like Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who had me to her office at MIT to go through all the research that she had on glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, and told me actually stories about how she had been shut down with her scientific research because this was going against the big ag, big cash, big pharma world. And so they didn't want her to have a voice. So around that time, the Roundup cancer litigations were starting in San Francisco, and I live near San Francisco. And so I went up to the trial, and I actually had a sign in my bag because I thought there would be a big protest against Monsanto, who manufactures glyphosate and all these GMO seeds. I presume because San Francisco used to be this place where you'd have lots of protests. Now, I hadn't historically been a protester. I went up there. Nothing was there. Like, there was one journalist who was there, and I walked right into the courtroom and sat down with Brent Wisner, Michael Baum, and RFK Jr., who were all litigating against Monsanto. And this was the very first time that that Monsanto had ever been brought to trial in front of a jury. So this is like historic. Like, it never ever got that far where a jury was going to decide if Monsanto had been in the wrong or not in terms of the carcinogenicity of glyphosate. And so when I realized no one was going to be reporting the day-to-day actual things of what was happening, I decided to start this blog, Glyphosate Girl, and report all the corruption that was being unveiled every single day there, with the, working alongside the EPA, working with media, all these things that a corporation does to make sure that their poisons can still be out there. So ever since then, I have been working very hard to try and raise awareness and get some policy change around glyphosate exposure.
Oh my gosh, it's wild, isn't it? Yeah, it's right from Roundup, right on the grains and the beans at harvest. I was talking to somebody talking about the oatmeal. They're doing it with these oats, and he was talking about, he was there, we're Quaker Oats, working for Quaker Oats, and he's watching them get sprayed on the conveyor belt, and it's just unbelievable. The imagery of that, this is something that we're giving to our kids, and you make the point, it's taken away the minerals, the nutrients, it's a carcinogen, it's an endocrine disruptor. It's just unbelievable what we're seeing. So how can they, we're like the sickest country on the planet. And nobody's doing anything about this. So I'm just so grateful for everyone like yourself who's a part of waking people up. I really do appreciate that. And
you too,
I wanted to ask you about this. Thank you. I wanted to ask you about this recent push by the pesticide makers for these liability shields. Now, as I understand this is something that you don't see with any other consumer product except for childhood vaccines. And this is like an assault on our constitutional rights, because they're taking away our due process under the law to take them to court, taking away our equal standing under the law. And I guess they've been denied this federally, and now they're going at it state by state. Is that right?
So what happened is that Bayer, the pharmaceutical company, purchased Monsanto in 2018. And they bought it so that they could diversify their portfolio, because a lot of their pharmaceutical products were going out of patent. And so they were no longer going to be able to charge this premium for them. And so in order to diversify and start competing more with the other seed and chemical companies, they bought Monsanto, which I don't even think the CEO of Monsanto at the time was going to push it through no matter what, against the advice of many. And he found an investment bank that was willing to execute on this acquisition. And there was absolutely no due diligence done by Monsanto and their advisors that was possibly exposing what the real liability risk was in terms of acquiring Monsanto, particularly with this pipeline of 100,000 different lawsuits that glyphosate causes cancer. And just digging even a little bit under the surface, you'd see that there's going to be some real grounds for those lawsuits to take place. But they just coded over all that, move forward, and lo and behold, have this huge, huge issue with all these lawsuits that are still ongoing, paying out $13 billion to plaintiffs who were claiming that glyphosate exposure caused their cancer. There's no end to this litigation as it stands now, because they're refusing to label it as a carcinogen, to warn people that maybe you should cover up and it could cause cancer. They will not admit it. And so instead, what they're doing is they're realizing with all these ongoing lawsuits, it's going to be never ending. They're going to bankrupt. And instead, we just have to then take away the Americans' right to sue. And so the way they're doing that is that last year they started with a bill that they've tried to put into appropriations. They've tried to put it into the Farm Bill. I think it's still sitting in the House draft of the Farm Bill. And what they're claiming is that we need the same label in all states. And so California has actually been fighting very, very hard to get this labeled under their Prop 65 as a known carcinogen to the state of California. It's on the Prop 65 list, but Monsanto Bayer is fighting very hard to keep that label off of the bottle. And so I don't know, it keeps on going, getting appealed. And ultimately, the Supreme Court of California agreed that labeling it as a carcinogen goes against Bayer's free speech rights, because they don't think that it causes cancer. So anyway, so what they're telling legislators is they're going to our federal legislators and they're saying, if we don't have uniform labeling in alignment with what the EPA thinks about these products, then it's just such it's an operational nightmare, because it's hard to do different kinds of labeling and different kinds of bottles and all of that. So it's much more streamlined if we just had something uniform across the states. What that actually means is that then in the state of California and similar states, you can't sue in state law that it caused cancer and you failed to warn me that it causes cancer. Right now, that's how a lot of these cancer litigations are moving forward. So they tried to push this through. Really, it counts as a liability shield because it's taking away your ability to sue under failure to warn. And so when it popped up in the House bill, I was like, oh my gosh, this is really, really awful. And then the Senate version of the Farm Bill didn't have this in it because it was at the time, it was a Democratic Senate and they were against this. But I think it's going to be interesting to see now with Maha and how that changes the tune of a lot of Republicans, because I don't think that they want to lose their ability to sue. But the issue is that most of them aren't even reading page 798 of this big, thick Farm Bill to even know what that is or what it means. So I've been meeting with different congressional offices and senatorial offices and just flagging that so that they understand that it's hidden there in all the description. So now so that's sitting there right now. That's going to be reintroduced at a federal level likely soon. So we have to keep our eye on that. But also we have, they're going state by state under this new umbrella called Modern Agriculture Alliance. And it actually is funded by things like the soybean industry groups and corn growers industry groups and CropLife, which is a front group for the agricultural chemical companies, and Bayer, of course, Syngenta. Syngenta, of course, is ChemChina. And so what they're doing is they're going state by state and saying that the farmers will not be able to use pesticides anymore unless we pass this liability shield. And so this is very pro-farmer, pro-rights, like everything, never mentioning that passing this would be a liability shield where farmers will get Parkinson's disease from paraquat, they'll get cancer from glyphosate, kidney disease from glyphosate, and they won't be able to sue. So what we're finding is that as we educate the state senators or state Congress people, by and large, if they haven't been massively paid off likely by Bayer, they're like, oh, is that what that means? No, that's crazy. Like, we don't want that. That is awful, because what it's doing is allowing a German company, Bayer, and ChemChina to come in and sell their poisons here with no recourse. We can't sue. It's not even an American company we're talking about. It's wild. It's such a confusing thing. And you're right. The other place that we see this is with the vaccine companies, and everything changed once that liability was in place. Because why wouldn't you just, if you don't care about humans, why wouldn't you just keep polluting and making it toxic? Because, it's probably cheaper.
I'm just, it's just the height of hubris. It's such a lie they're pushing that, to feed ourselves, to grow our own food, we need to use these poisons. And, across all these countries, across all of history, we never had these poisons. And then we see the difference. We see that our health deficits are just massive. And so I just, this is something that I push, is that, we can reclaim that independence and grow our own food locally. And it's never been easier in so many ways. We've got the technology and the know-how, and it really is an attack on our freedoms. And I love the point you make about it being a German company, because right now there's such a movement, to put America first. Well, this is putting, these corporations first. And it really is. It's taken our constitutional rights to defend our families, from this toxicity that we see. Kind of along those lines, what we recently saw was an FTC ruling where Mexico, it seems, is being forced to buy our GMO corn now with glyphosate on it. Do I understand that right?
Yeah. So this is so disappointing. Like a few years ago, actually, Mexico came out and they were really concerned about the carcinogenicity of glyphosate and the fact that their food culture is very corn-based. And so what they wanted to do is ban the use of glyphosate and also stop importing white corn that they would be using in their tortillas. And that white corn was GMO corn from the United States by and large. So they said, we're not going to import that anymore. We think that we need to prioritize the health of our citizens. And the United States was floored and appalled that they wouldn't keep on taking our GMO corn. Now, mind you, this could also be an amazing opportunity for a lot of cornfields and farmers that are currently exporting to Mexico to start to make that transition to regenerative agriculture and think about backing off of the GMO seeds and making it less toxic. But no, instead, the United States doubled down and went into a big trade fight about how they have to accept our poisons, basically, our GMO corn and our glyphosate. And Mexico came forward and said, well, that's fine. We're going to go to this panel that is a trade commission, a panel that they hire to arbitrate. And we're going to show them just how toxic GMO corn is. And so there's a huge, thick document with all the research that shows this really is not good for consumption. And no one should be able to argue that that is false. Like, it was overwhelming. But lo and behold, the panel comes out and says, nope, actually that goes against trade agreements. You have to keep on importing, or else we're going to put these really, really horrible, restrictions on your trade in other ways. And it's a long line of the United States threatening other people with our freaking poisons. And it's a bad look. I'm super embarrassed. It's bad enough we're making ourselves sick, and then we're forcing our neighbors and people around the world to be sick too. And it's just insanity. Like, it's so incredibly logical that this is not the right path forward that it just baffles me. Of course, it's just the bottom line of the money. But once again, if you go back and you say, okay, let's use this opportunity to grow new things, which, by the way, also isn't easy, because a lot of the farmers I've talked to who are on this path towards regeneration, they actually are having trouble accessing non-GMO seeds. So most of the seeds that are available to the farmers are GMO. They're dipped in insecticides and they're super toxic, but they can't source the clean stuff. So there is an opportunity to try to find the clean seeds, provide them to our farmers, and let them start to do what they do best and grow beautiful produce,
Yeah, that's so crazy. And it's our very sovereignty that we're losing there. And, this is just mad scientists in a lab. They're not really safety testing these GMOs either. They just say it's equivocally, close enough. If it looks like corn and it tastes like corn, it's just as good as corn. But, we see that with the GMO BT cotton, this is toxic to all animals. They're all dying who are eating it. And that was completely unexpected. And yeah, so it's just unbelievable what we're letting happen. You know, if you look back 20 years ago, it was pretty much just the states leading the way as far as consuming, you know, these GMO products. And now we see the health deficits. We see we're living 6 years less than Europeans, where 40 years ago we lived just as long as them. I think it's clear as day what's happening. And you mentioned these studies. You mentioned this wealth of studies. You know, I think it's over 2,000 peer-reviewed studies that are on PubMed alone. And you know, Monsanto's been caught red-handed having to doctor their own science. You know, the Monsanto papers, that was like a huge scandal that was exposed, where we got access to their internal memos from a subpoena for a court case, and it showed how they were, you know, as Kennedy says, they were hiring these biostitutes, hiring these scientists to ghostwrite the studies exactly how they wanted them, and yeah, so it's unbelievable what we're seeing happening. I wanted to ask your advice for, you know, consumers. You know, what's the best way that we can go about avoiding glyphosate? You know, it's so, you know, I was recently working in a small rural town, and nothing in the grocery store was organic, so it was especially hard there. But you know, most people do have more options. So what you know, where should people start? You know, what are the worst offenders when it comes to this?
So the worst offenders usually are going to be the things that, as we spoke about in the beginning, are sprayed pre-harvest. So that's grains, legumes, some sugarcane. That is where right before harvest, the farmer will come out and spray down and kill, effectively, quickly ripen, kill the crop to make it much easier to go and harvest it, because it's all uniform. Otherwise, you might harvest one part of the field at one point, another part at another as it ripens. This ripens it all immediately, and you can go and do it. But unfortunately, after the harvest, it goes straight to the mill, and then the food companies purchase it, goes to the food companies, and it's a systemic herbicide. So it's not like it's something that washes off. It's in the actual crop itself. So then that lands in our food supply, which is so awful. And this is only allowed, you can only do this with non-organic crops. So when I'm looking, usually the very worst offenders, and we're just talking non-organic. In fact, I was at Whole Foods in New York City, and I was standing in front of the hummus, and there were some people deciding which hummus they were going to buy. And they said, oh, well, it's not that organic hummus is so expensive. Like, let's not get that one. Let's get the regular. And I super weirdly, by the way, they were like, who is this person? I'm like, no, get the organic one because of the glyphosate spray. And they're like, oh, and then they didn't get the organic one. That hummus, the chickpeas that are sprayed with glyphosate, when food is tested, they regularly come back with enormous levels of glyphosate on them. Same is true with a study that Moms Across America did on Banza pasta. And that's chickpea based, and it ended up having extraordinarily high levels of glyphosate on it. It's non-organic. It looks like it should be healthy alternative for people that are gluten-free, but that was not good. So you're also going to find it in other baked goods. So breads, you're likely going to have high levels in, and cereals, and a lot of granola bars, and these things that are oat-based that would also have high levels of glyphosate. So it is hard to avoid. And the problem is too that a lot of times the organic things are tested and they'll come back positive for glyphosate, though nowhere near as high. And what we've realized is that organic farmers can't use synthetic fertilizers. And so they're taking the fertilizer from the CAFOs, the confined animal feeding operations. And that cattle, or those animals, have been eating GMO crops, and the glyphosate goes through the feces, which is then used as fertilizer on the organic farms. And so then it can be taken up on those crops. So there's exposure there in organic, as well as from sometimes irrigation, because glyphosate is very, very water loving, and it goes wherever water goes. And so a lot of times you'll find that positive in the irrigation systems, and actually sometimes in tap water as well. So one thing that I tell everyone, and I'm really, really strict about it, is I have an under the counter water filter that I'm just dedicated to using. And not just for glyphosate, but for all the other things that are in drinking water, and atrazine being the second most used herbicide in this country, and it's banned everywhere else. It is so severely endocrine disrupting that it's now being traced to penis malformations in fetuses. It's decreasing testosterone, decreasing estrogen, causing all other birth defects, actually specifically in male genitalia. So in my house, where I'm growing sons, I have my water filter, and there are ways to also have a water filter on the go in a water bottle with a filter on the top. And I don't get any kickbacks from it, but I'm just going to say that Clearly Filtered is a company that specifically has been shown to filter out that atrazine and glyphosate. So that's the one that I choose to go with. That's a really great way. And then a lot of times people are thinking, well, if you eat a fruit that has a peel on it, say an orange or apples, that you can wash it off on the outside and it will be fine. You can still eat that fruit. The problem is, as I said earlier, like in an orange orchard, they are spraying glyphosate regularly at the base of those orange trees. And so the roots will take it up and take it up into the fruit. So it's not even on the outside of the fruit, it's in the fruit itself. So a lot of times you'll see that orange juice that's non-organic has very high levels of glyphosate in it. Same with wines. Wines can have high levels as well because of that same use of it around the base of the vines. And actually, I interviewed a scientist who worked for the USDA, and he was a specialist in orchards, and he had spent all this time there, and he was pointing out to senior people, he's like, this isn't good. You're killing. First of all, when we're spraying it, so there's no life around the base of the orange tree whatsoever. That's not healthy for the tree. Second, it definitely goes up. All the research shows it goes up into the orange, and they just pushed it aside and told him not to pay attention, do your job. That's not it. And so that was very frustrating for him. Fortunately, he's now living in retirement, so he can speak about it. But that's what they do to the scientists that pointed out.
Unbelievable, isn't it? You talk about killing the soil, right? So it's registered as an antibiotic. A lot of people don't know that. There's Monsanto was kind of caught paying a whole troll army to astroturf the internet to give all these talking points from the other side, and it seems some of them don't even know that it is registered as an antibiotic. The way it chelates those nutrients, it kills our gut flora, and so this causes so many digestive issues that we see and so many different pathologies. Can you share a little bit about that and why that's so damaging?
Yeah. And, this goes back to, I think, most of us that have chronic disease, and so much of the research that's come out about the microbiome and importance of a very diverse, healthy biome in order to have a successful life, really, in all ways. And when you learn that this is patented as an antibiotic, antimicrobial, it's really horrifying, because what it does, actually, it's a very, very special kind of antibiotic where it selects the very beneficial bacteria in our gut while allowing some of the pathogenic bacteria to still proliferate. So you get this dysbiosis, it's called, where you have the balance of your gut biome is very off. And what can happen then, and this leads into leaky gut as well, which is really, for those who don't know what leaky gut is, it's that the barrier between the gut and the bloodstream sometimes gets compromised. And so some of the toxins that should stay in your intestine make their way out into your bloodstream, and it can launch a whole cascade of inflammatory and autoimmune. It will start the autoimmune cascade. And that was definitely what was happening with me. Glyphosate has a role in there because and gluten actually is inflammatory even on its own. So you combine gluten and this layer of glyphosate, and you have a perfect recipe for full-on gut dysbiosis, for penetrating our tight junction, or opening our tight junctions too long in our gut lining and allowing this inflammation to happen. Glyphosate is so key in this process. And not only that, but it's when killing this beneficial gut bacteria, you're also shutting off a lot of the pathways to which we get serotonin, all these beneficial things that come from our microbiome. And you look and see what's happening on antidepressants and the explosion in use, particularly in this country. And you can't help but think glyphosate has a part of this, because we're not getting the natural serotonin that we need in order to have a balanced mood. Then you add on top of that the fact that glyphosate is working as a mineral chelator. And so, which means that it is binding to minerals. So in the soil, when it's sprayed and or is present in any kind of soil, it's actually holding on to the zinc, the manganese, the magnesium that we need to be eating and being exposed to in order to have a healthy body and a healthy mood. And so I'm always also on top of supplementing my whole family with these minerals, because we simply do not have them in our food supply anymore in this country, more so in regenerative or organic, but by and large, it's just completely nutrient deficient. So that is just a really important thing. And I just feel like that is behind this explosion in antidepressant use and other kinds of sedatives, because it's a horrible feeling to not have magnesium. And I know, because that was one of the first things I did for myself when I got into a magnesium bath. I realized that I must have none in my body, because what was this amazing calm feeling? So when I see someone with road rage, I feel like giving them a magnesium bottle. Take it. That's what's going on here. And it's important to note, too, that Europe recently re-registered glyphosate, which was a huge shame, because around the time of the litigation, the beginning of the litigation, RFK and the other lawyers went over to Europe and presented in front of Parliament just how much of a carcinogen this chemical is. And there were a lot of people, members of the Green Party in Parliament, that really were against glyphosate. They're like, let's get this banned once and for all. This isn't for Europe. And something happened over COVID where industry got in there and worked their magic, and suddenly it was re-registered against like all these protests. And one thing that they did do, though, that's great, is they banned the use for pre-harvest desiccation, which I talked about earlier. And that is estimated to be 80% of our dietary exposure is just from that process. So the good news for Europeans is that, first of all, they weren't even doing that as much as they do here, but they won't be doing it now from here on out. I think that they still do it in England, which is an unfortunate side effect of Brexit, that they're introducing GMOs and these chemicals.
Yeah, there's some good news. It's funny. You're talking about the worst offenders, and yeah, gosh, we're just drowning in so much toxicity, so many of the options. So, I find myself cheating here and there, and like you said, I really feel the difference when it comes to eating those grains. I feel the brain fog. I feel this tiredness, and but when I eat, I've had the chance to eat. Like sometimes you can go to the grocery store, Aldi's. They'll have like the cookies from the Netherlands. They'll have them imported from Europe, but they won't be organic. But I'll eat those and I'll feel fine. And so, like you said, people have had this anecdotal experience of going to Europe and eating the bread, and they feel great. They lose weight. They're eating more because they're traveling. They come back here, they feel terrible again. So,
in fact, it's interesting to say, because just last week I spoke to a group of about 40 women who they're expats, and they're in the United States. They're living in New York, and they came over just for a period of time, and they've felt really sick since they've been here. And they're just like, what's the story? And it's so embarrassing. Like, it's terrible that they suddenly can't be healthy when they come to our country that's so modern. And it's just outrageous, and it's not fair, and it's stealing all of our rights to health. And I'm mad that I have to be, on behalf of our country, apologizing for our toxic ways, and I was happy to see recently that Trump and Kennedy were talking about how Europe doesn't want to import our food anymore. And that's true, because we spray it with freaking Roundup. And unfortunately, Europe may be checking to see our grains, what they're sprayed with, but farmers here are also then substituting it for other pre-harvest desiccants. So they're spraying with things like dicamba. I think diquat is another one. And so they're putting these other toxins that aren't tested as pre-harvest desiccants, when what they could actually do is go back 20 years and just use a swather and an air dryer and do it the way we always have throughout time before this chemical option was even viable. And that's something that I actually brought up with the USDA, because I think funding those swathers, it's just an attachment to the tractor. It would be the best thing you could do for public health. It just, by far, the most impactful thing you could do to improve public health today is to ban pre-harvest desiccation with glyphosate, and watch as people start feeling better and their guts get back in order. I mean, obviously there's so many other toxins. This is just a really bad one.
Yeah, we got to start somewhere, and I agree. To me, this looks like the worst culprit. You mentioned Dr. Stephanie Seneff's research earlier, and for those who haven't seen it, glyphosate is like 98 to 99.9% correlated with the increase, prevalence of all these diseases going parabolic. Everything from autism, especially, dementia, cancers, autoimmune diseases, celiac, obesity, diabetes, you name it. And yeah, it's just crazy. And this is everything to me. This is the lives of our loved ones that we're losing. And like you mentioned, and it's even our liberties now. They're taking away our constitutional rights to stand up about it. So, everything's on the line right now. And yeah, with spring coming up and this all this momentum, if there's ever a time to ban this practice, it's right now. So that's something to pray for. Kelly, where can we direct people to help with the cause for this and join and voice that we want our food to be safe again?
So right now, actually, I'm collecting anyone who wants to take part right now in this pesticide, fighting back against this pesticide liability shield. I'm building state-based teams of people that can go and just make phone calls or send emails to their elected officials to make sure that they understand what the actual story is here and what Bayer and ChemChina are trying to do. That's a really important short-term thing. And there's going to be another opportunity actually before February 20th to be submitting comments to the EPA in terms of, because EPA now is fielding comments about whether maybe a liability shield would be good. I mean, who are these people working for? Anyway, so we need to get our comments there because Americans, who are the Americans that are writing and saying, yeah, definitely make a liability shield? I mean, what planet is this? So anyway, we're going to do that. You can follow me on Instagram. I do a lot of call to actions there under Glyphosate Girl and give a lot of people opportunities to really make an impact on this topic. And if you need information to present, I have a lot of students, a lot of college students that will come to me and they do reports on glyphosate and chemical agriculture. If you need information on that, my website, Glyphosate Facts, I've gone through and listed tons of independent peer-reviewed research on the toxicity of glyphosate. And so that is at your disposal if you're writing a report and you need the substantiation. I've also worked with various cities who have tried to get glyphosate banned in their parks and public spaces. And right now one is going in San Francisco and hopefully goes well. So that also, you will find information on Glyphosate Facts to support your arguments when you need to bring them in front of city councils. And then in terms of big picture, I think we could all agree as soon as you start seeing what regenerative agriculture can do in terms of eliminating the need for these pesticides because the soil's healthy, the crops are healthy, that is so exciting because they won't need glyphosate once they really get going down this route. And so when you're thinking about your consumer purchasing power, there aren't that many things yet that are on the market that are regenerative, but when they're there, definitely support it because you're telling that farmer you appreciate the effort that they put into the soil and making their soil healthy. And then finally, the film Common Ground that I'm involved with is coming out on Amazon Prime on Earth Day, which is April 22nd. And so that's going to be a great one to learn all about these things. Glyphosate is discussed, as is regenerative farming solutions, and you leave with a sense of hope instead of dread. And so with that, we're trying really hard to bring that regenerative agriculture message to Brooke Rollins in the USDA because she is not someone who has any kind of background in regenerative agriculture, and we know that's the only way forward. So if you know anyone in the USDA or knows someone that knows Brooke Rollins, please let me know because I would love to have a talk with her.
Here. Yeah, let's make our food safe again. That's right. I tell you what, it's the Common Ground. Yeah, that's the Kiss the Ground sequel that was in theaters recently, and that's coming out to stream everywhere soon. And yeah, the more that we can do, you mentioned getting safe food. Some people say, well, is organic always perfect? And there's plenty of studies that show it may not be perfect, but it's 90% better or 98% better. And my point is, wouldn't you pay a premium if it was 2% better, if there was 2% less poison or 10% less poison and that's all you had? Those are the only two choices you had for the food our kids are eating. And don't you want to support moving more and more in that direction? Right.
Totally.
So I love how you said that.
Yeah, the best way you can signal is that way. And I definitely am. And it's not like I'm perfect. I'm probably 70% organic, 30% not, because I didn't have a social life when I couldn't go out. And like restaurants by and large are not organic, except for some. There's sometimes some, but a lot of them are odd.
this is my point to people, is that because some people say, okay, well, I eat really well, which I doubt they know how bad the problem is. So I don't think they're actually eating as purely as they think they are. But my point is, well, don't you want to be able to go out? Don't you want your kids to be able to eat at their friends? Don't you want them to be able to eat at school? And so we're just drowning in this toxicity. So all food should be safe to eat generally, and yeah, we got to do a whole lot better. So.
Totally.
Well, thanks so much for coming on today, Kelly. And yeah, until next time, it feels good to feel good, and poison is bad. Let's heal.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
Sure, that's great.